This is Thank You Mama, weekly lessons from mothers all around the world. Hello and welcome to Thank You Mama. My name is Anna Tyler and my guest today is Laura Davis. Laura is the author of 6 nonfiction books, including The Courage to Heal from Women Survivors of Child Sexual Abuse, Becoming the Parent You Want to Be, and I Thought We'd Never Speak Again, The Road from Estrangement to Reconciliation. Her books have been translated into 11 languages and sold more than 1.8 million copies. And Laura just published her first memoir, The Burning Light of 2 Stars, a mother-daughter story, which tells the story of her, I would call it, dramatic relationship with her mother. So guess why we're talking to Laura today? Hi, Laura, and welcome.
Thank you. I'm so glad for the invitation and the pleasure of talking to you and your audience.
I'm very, very excited you are here because as we just quickly chatted about it, I have recently had many guests who had not so romantic relationships with their moms, more complex relationships with their moms. And somehow it seems like the universe is now, after 80-something episodes, decided to dip me into those more complex relationships. And I have to say, I am enjoying these conversations tremendously and learning a lot from them. And I'm thinking how much we learn no matter what a relationship looks like. And how beautiful it is that I managed to find guests that want to talk about their difficult relationships. It's easy to be like, oh, I had the most amazing mom in the world. Let me talk about her. I'm grateful for guests like you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think mother-daughter relationships can be just incredibly complex. You know, they're often not just one way.
No. Laura, but let's first talk about you. I'd like to learn more about you and your work and where you come from.
Well, words is what comes to mind. I have been, in love with words my whole life. From the time I could hold a pen or a pencil, probably one of those big fat number 2 blue pencils that I had in elementary school. I have used words as a way to understand myself, to seek for answers, to find the truth, definitely to speak the truth, to break silence, to confront, to grieve, and to make my most critical life decisions. So that's just on a private level, but in the public sphere, I've used words to inform, to provoke, to agitate, to educate, to tell stories, to inspire, and to entertain. And so, my first book came out, I was 31 years old, The Courage to Heal. And so since then, I've now written 7. And, writing has been a huge part of my life. And if you track the topics of my book, they pretty much track the trajectory of my life. I've also, for the last couple of decades, been teaching writing as a tool for self-discovery and for healing and for transformation. And I also help people write their books, and technically I'm a writing teacher because that's the vehicle I use. But what I really love to do, I feel like my heart's work, is leading groups and building communities of people. And I just love what happens when you get a room full of people together to start writing and sharing and witnessing the truth of their lives, because it just transforms people's lives. In my public life, I have been, admired, I have been revered, I have been hated, I've been sued for my writing. So I've really had a whole range of experiences in my professional career. On my website, I have this tagline, healing words that change lives. And I think that pretty much sums up, everything I do in my work life. I've been in the same relationship with my partner, Karen, for over 30 years. We have 3 children, 3 grandchildren. So I have like a really rich family life as well. And I think that's mostly what I want to share about me.
May we also share that you are a cancer survivor?
Yeah, I had breast cancer when I was 50. When my daughter was 10, my two youngest, 10 and 14. And I just remember going through that, and my prayer was my mantra was, just let me see them graduate from high school, and they're now 28 and 25 years old. So I definitely got
Hmm.
my wish, and I'm healthy.
That's
So,
beautiful.
I was saying to you before that cancer was not something that was like in my family.
Hmm.
Um, so, I was the first, and it was kind of a shock. Um, but it changed me in a lot of ways.
Mm.
It with this much hindsight, I'd say they were positive changes. Cancer made me deeply appreciative of the moment and doing what I want and not doing what I don't want.
Mm.
And also just knowing that life is sweet and life can change completely in a moment.
Hmm.
I really know that in such a visceral way.
What an important lesson, isn't it? Because that allows you to really appreciate it and enjoy it, and never lose that love for life that people just take it for granted too much, I think. Speaking
Right.
as a
Yes.
person who comes from a family with too many cancer experiences, we take our health for granted and life for granted. Laura, you are originally from New Jersey. Do I remember that right from your book?
Yes.
Yes.
I grew up in New Jersey, and I now live in California. And in large part, that 3,000-mile move was to get away from my mother. I felt like I couldn't. She was such a looming presence in my life, and had so much disapproval and criticism and desire to control me. And I had such a strong will that I felt like the only way I could really establish myself as an adult was to have that kind of
Mm,
physical distance. And
mm,
because I established that when I was young, I just, I made a life here and stayed here.
mm-hmm.
So for most of my adult life and much of hers, we lived 3,000 miles apart from each
Mm,
other.
mm. But you also, here's an interesting story. You left at 18 to join a guru.
Yeah, actually, I was 16.
You were 16. I,
uh,
I did my
I was
math wrong.
16 turning 17 when
Okay, he's turning
yeah.
17 and you stayed for 3 years with them. And your brother has been there already. He left before you, hasn't he?
No, he was still there, and he stayed long after I left.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I was a child of the 60s and early 70s. And not just me, but myself, my brother, my father, we all got really caught up in the era and those times. I mean, my parents took me to Woodstock, the music festival,
Oh, I
when I
love
was
that.
13 years
I
old.
love the story about it. You know that my parents took me to the Rolling Stones concert when I was 2 years old.
Uh,
So when I read the Woodstock story, I'm like, oh my God, here's something we have in common, more or less.
yeah, yeah.
So you stayed with the guru, so to say, for 3 years, and then you started working at a radio station. What I'm heading to is you rejected. You were offered a full scholarship for Wesley, which is one of the most prestigious colleges in the United States. And you are one of the rare authors in the United States who did not study to become a book author.
I think lots of people don't study to be a book author.
I don't,
I think I think many people don't. They just write because of their life experience, and they practice and they learn. And, I think now people getting an MFA is more common,
mm-hmm,
but there are many, many very successful writers who have not taken that particular path.
mm-hmm,
One of the things that happened with my mother, there's a lot of love between us, a really deep love.
mm-hmm,
And there were aspects of our relationship that were quite positive. But, my mother, she grew up, she was born in 1927. And I could only tell you that now because she's dead and because she never wanted anyone to know her
I
age.
I remember
And,
that from the
and
book.
she was raised in an immigrant home on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, to Orthodox Jewish parents who had fled Russia to come to the United States. And her father, my grandfather, was a kosher butcher, and they were very poor, but everyone they knew was poor. Um,
Mm,
But I think she did feel a lot of shame about her circumstances. And she was extremely smart. She skipped 2 grades. She graduated from high school at 15, and then she had to fight with her father to go to college because there was no reason for anyone to go to college, particularly a girl.
Mm-hmm.
But she won that fight, and she ended up going to City College of New York, which is was free, but you had to have really good grades to get in.
Mm-hmm.
And she was the only person in her family to go to college. She was also an incredible beauty. At 19, she won a beauty contest. She became campus queen of City College, and as part of that prize, she was cast in her first play as the young ingenue. She always told me that she was terrible in that play, but it launched a 50-year love affair with her in the theater. And she was an actor and later a storyteller, but she always had a big public life. And she was a remarkable person in many ways, and she was admired and loved by so many people. And but she was very challenging for me as a mother. And I think it sort of reflected in her theatrical life, but she really needed to be the star. She was the sun, and she expected me to be a little satellite revolving around her. And that's just not my personality. I have a very big life force, big energy. I think I wasn't a passive kid. I was when I was really young, but by the time I hit adolescence, we really started struggling a lot. She really wanting to control my life. And then, I made many choices that were just horrifying to her. Like you mentioned, I joined the ashram for 3 or 4 years. I left when I was 21. I quit college 3 times. I refused that full scholarship to Wellesley, which I don't know if she ever forgave me for doing that. I used to say to her, Mom, if I'd gone to Wellesley, I just would have come out sooner. And so I never.
That's funny.
We had that joke between us.
Yeah.
And then I came out to her as a lesbian, and she said, you've confirmed my worst fear about you. Her response to pretty much everything I chose to do was that somehow I was, doing it to hurt her or to spite her, because the universe revolved around her.
But it didn't. I just want to mention that reading your book, her husband, your father, left. Your brother left first, I think, and then her husband left, and that must have been very difficult for her. She supported him while he was in school. She became a social worker. She supported him to finish his degree. And at one point, she found herself a single mom, so to say, raising with you at home. So she had
with
her
me,
challenges.
A very difficult daughter.
Yeah.
She got divorced really before the huge wave of divorce happened. So like in her world, in her milieu, she was the only person to be divorced, and she felt shame. She'd been abandoned, by my father, who left to become a hippie in California. And my brother was, taking a lot of acid, dropped out of college, joined the guru. That's how I got into it. And then I was, she really wanted to control me. I was like
you.
The last
You were the
one
last
left in
thing.
the family.
Yes, yeah.
But she couldn't, and that set us really into huge conflict. And it wasn't until much later that I really was able to look back and just appreciate and really feel so much empathy for what she was up against. And I think many kids in families with divorce, I blamed the wrong person. I blamed my mother. Because and I idolized my father, who had abandoned me because of his, kind of glamorous to me hippie lifestyle. And my mother was trying to, was paying the bills. She was trying to create a stable home for me. She really did everything. She was doing it for me, but I just was, I didn't appreciate it at the time. I just saw her as an impediment and as boring and traditional and all of that. So I think that's typical. We had in some ways a typical kind of adolescent mother-daughter conflict, but then ours got much more complex and much more difficult and much more estranged as I got older. And the biggest thing that really split us apart was that when I was 27, I remembered having been sexually abused by her father. And it was just an
Mm.
incredibly devastating time in my life, the worst time I ever went through. And when I told her, she denied it, and she not just denied it, she attacked me. She screamed at me. She, abandoned me really at the worst time in my life, and that rift lasted for many years. I also then wrote a book. My first book, Courage to Heal, was about healing from sexual abuse, and it talked about my grandfather. I mean, it wasn't primarily about me at all. It was a healing guide. But the fact that I published that book and then it became an incredibly popular book. So there was a lot of press, and I was on TV, and I was traveling and speaking. And so not only, according to her, was I spreading lies, now I was doing it on national TV.
Mm.
And I desperately wanted her to believe me, and she desperately wanted me to recant. And that was kind of where we were stuck for a number of years, with that kind of animosity and distance between us. And I had to create an alternative family because her whole side of the family turned against me. And it was an incredibly painful time. But I think mothers and daughters, it's different for different people, but my mother and I had some kind of very compelling connection. And, neither of us were ever willing to give up on each other. I've often said we were two souls who could not quit each other. And even when we were at our most estranged, we were still connected. When I wasn't speaking to her, she was living in my head. I was still hearing her voice, mostly her critical voice, not her supportive voice. And I was deeply engaged in our relationship, even when we weren't speaking. And I feel like have spent, I spent the last 30 years of my life working on reconciling with my mother. And to me, it is, I feel like it was the path given to me to grow, and this relationship, which was so incredibly difficult and challenging, we both just kept coming back to it and
Mm.
struggling to find a way to connect. And, at first we did that by agreeing to disagree. We took this huge unresolved issue, you know, sitting there, which was the sexual abuse, and we just stopped talking about it. I didn't stop talking about it to other people, but I stopped trying
Mhm.
to convince her
Mhm.
it had happened, and she stopped trying to, convince me it didn't happen.
Mhm.
And we started to focus on reestablishing and building some new threads of connection. And, some of that came when I produced grandchildren. We had grandchildren in common. And then there were always things we had enjoyed, even little simple things like playing cards together, going to the movies together, seeing theater together. And one of the steps my mother took, which I thought was really something she did to move us towards reconciliation, is she began coming to California in the winter. She, as a snowbird, she wanted to get away from the New Jersey winters. This is after she retired from her career as a social worker. And she would rent a place in my town. And at first, I was not welcoming at all. It was like I did not want her there. But she would come, she would have her own life, her own friends, and we started to spend time together. And she did that for about 9 years. And over the course of those years, we really began to find a way back to each other and to find a way to establish new kinds of connections, and to weave a relationship together, and then she would go back to New Jersey for the majority of the year. The biggest challenge after that was, and I would have said at that point, oh, we're reconciled, and I wrote a whole book about it called I
Mm.
Thought We'd Never Speak Again. But then when she got old, she contacted me one day. She was 80, and she announced, she didn't ask, that she was moving to my town for the rest of her life, to live out her life until she died. And that's the story I tell in my memoirs about those years. And it was part of me really, really wanted her to come. There was a really deep longing I had that maybe finally this, caring for her at the end of her life, being with her at the end of her life, we might finally heal our relationship the rest of the way. Like that was my secret, unspoken hope. But the other part of me was completely freaked out. I felt invaded. I felt like it was going to ruin everything. I didn't feel capable. I didn't want to be her caregiver, and I just dreaded, I felt like our relationship worked because there was this 3,000-mile buffer between us. And so, that's one of the opening scenes in the book is her phone call saying, "I'm coming," and my reaction, and then I had to have that experience. And it was a very challenging, complicated, life-changing experience to walk with her through her death.
You talking about it, I'm going through the book again. It touched me deeply when I was reading it. Now I'm reliving it again. But let's move into the lessons. I can't wait to hear what do you feel you've learned from her and from this very, very complex relationship.
Well, when you gave me, you wrote to me and said, what are the lessons? It was a very long list I came up with very quickly. So despite what I'm saying about how challenging the relationship was, she was such a huge force in my life that she had so much influence. And there were I'll start with the positives. There were many positive things. My mother had incredibly good friends her whole life until she had dementia. And then it was actually very tragic because she desperately wanted friends and she wasn't even capable of having a conversation. So, she couldn't really make or hold a friend. When she didn't know, what had happened 5 minutes before. But, until that point in her life, she always had really good friends. And so she taught me the value of really deep, strong women friends. She always, my father too, really taught me when I was little to trust my intelligence and my creativity, and that I was capable of doing, big things. I was capable of making things happen in the world. So I grew up with that core belief in myself. As I mentioned, my mom and I like to play cards, but we also played Scrabble and lots of other games. And I still play games a lot. It's a place where I can just deeply relax instantly. And so I feel like it's a simple thing, but that was a gift. My parents took me camping and out in nature a lot. And so I feel like they both gave me a love of nature. And I find nature one of the absolute most important go-tos in my life. Like right now when there's so much stress and so much to be distraught about, for me, being out in nature every day is what enables me to keep going. Another thing is that she, my father walked out on her. She had, and then, the divorce was not very good. It was more in his favor than her favor. But she actually forgave him. And towards the end of his life, because he died, maybe almost 10 years before she did, he was older, they became friends. And so she really taught me that you can forgive someone who has really wronged you. And so I think that was a model I really appreciate. On the more challenging side, she couldn't teach me to relax. Through her example, she was a really obsessively busy person. When she had 3 calendars going all the time, and she was going from this to that. She would come to our house for dinner, and halfway through dinner, she'd like bolt up and leave because she had another commitment or another friend, or she just, I used to have to make appointments to see her. And so she was wired like she was a doer, and I'm wired the same way. And
Is it running away from something when you have to keep yourself busy the whole time?
I think it's, I don't think it's quite that simple, but I'm sure that's an aspect of it. Yes. I think there were some things she didn't want to face, couldn't face. And I'm sure it started as a coping strategy and it just became her way of life. And for me, I feel like I grew up with that model and I'm wired the same way. So I really struggle to just do nothing, or just to be, or just to have downtime. And I'm always generating new things, new activities, new whatever.
Are you trying to learn to relax and do nothing?
Yeah, my spouse is the opposite. She's like really the queen of being.
Oh, yes, she's a yoga teacher.
Yeah, so being with her for 30 years has really helped. I always am working on this, but it's just my set point. My natural set point is busy, and I don't know that that's ever going to change. I mean, I do far less than I used to, but it's just it's easy for me to just spin out on, you know, projects and books and teaching and the next idea. And I'm always generating things, which, is good for my career. I think it's been good for the, many thousands of people I've taught. It's good for, the millions of people who've read my book. But for me in my personal life, I wish that it wasn't always that way, that I had more balance. So, that's been something I've been working on for several decades. And I feel like that did come from her. And, I think in terms of parenting, there are things she did that I emulated. Like she really, she always was supportive of my brother and I, whatever our interests were. We were interested in dinosaurs or trains or, whatever. She would immediately get resources and things for us to deepen our knowledge and learn more. And I always did that with my children. She was very focused on and had a very language rich environment. I guess an educational home you would call it. And I did that with my kids. And I think the thing I really wanted to do differently as a parent is I really wanted my kids to have what I would call, psychic privacy, that I didn't have rummage rights to get inside their head and their emotions. I mean, when they were little, of course, but as they, turned into adolescence, I really gave them privacy and I allowed them to move away from me and to make other relationships more important. I really let them go. And, in some ways that's painful, but I feel like it was healthier. And I also, from the time they were little, I really honored their right to express and feel their emotions. I let them have tantrums. I let them get angry. I let them, I didn't tell them to, you want to stop crying, I'll give you something to cry about. This is the kind of things I heard, which I think is pretty typical of parents of the generation of my mother.
Of the generation, yes. Yeah, yeah. I love the psychic privacy. I think it's so interesting. That's such an interesting aspect. I never heard anybody talk about it before. Allowing your children, as you said, to emancipate themselves from their parent.
Right. That's right. And I think, my time as a caregiver and the incredibly difficult challenges that I write about and experienced, it really opened my capacity to love at a much deeper level. And it really taught me that, you can love someone who betrayed you in the past. You can love someone who struggled with you. And that, it just created so much more nuance and more capacity in my own heart. I've lived in my head a lot of my life. And so, I think that's really the greatest gift is that by the two of us persevering and for me saying yes to her ultimatum that she was coming, it really led me to crack open some places that were still closed inside of me. So I'm really grateful about that. And I think the other thing she couldn't really teach me, which I wish was different, is she never really taught me about having deep intimacy with a partner. Because, my parents' marriage, I think, would be described as functional. They functioned well. They parented well together. They agreed about money. They agreed about politics. They agreed about kind of how they wanted to live. This is until my father left. I mean, they actually had, a lot of good years together, but it wasn't an intimate or passionate marriage. So I didn't have that model. And then, he left when she was in her early 40s. She died at 86. So for the next 4 decades, she never remarried and she never had a long-term partner.
Did you talk to her about it? Why she didn't?
Yeah, we talked about it. And there were times she was really honest with me and other times she wasn't. I mean, she said that she liked being admired from afar. That she's told me, she said, I don't like it when men get real. I don't like it when they fart and burp.
I love that part when they fart and burp, yes.
So I think she understood that, that she was just, and also no man was good enough for her. She always she was pursued by men, in her circle. But I think she told me, she said she didn't really know how to let a man in. She didn't know how to find that softness inside herself. And she regretted it. I mean, she did express that. She regretted that she wasn't capable. And I think, I'm not going to speculate on what caused that, but
It's interesting. She managed to let your dad in, so she was capable of doing that once, but then she didn't want to do it again.
Like I said, I don't think they had they did not have an intimate marriage.
Yeah,
they were not.
Yeah, they had a partnership.
They were partners. They had a
Mm-hmm.
partnership,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't. I never felt that they were like in love with each other, or that they were. I just never had any sense of that. But they worked well together. They were partners, and that worked until the 60s rolled in.
The freedom roll in. Laura, how did you learn
Yeah,
it?
the free.
How did you learn it? If you didn't have it modeled for you.
It's just been something I've worked on. I've done a lot of therapy in my life. I've practiced with my partner, and I'm still practicing. It's not something that comes easily to me or naturally to me. It's easy for me to get in my own little bubble of myself, which is what my mother did. And so I have to always work against that. We all have our issues in life, and this is one of mine that I, will just keep. It's an area, it's an edge of growth for me, always. In some ways, since she's died, she's been dead for 7 years, and I find that my relationship with her has continued to evolve, and that when I think of her, I think about her with so much love and appreciation now. And, because I'm not dealing with the difficult aspects of her personality, it has really opened me up to. And also, I'm much older, to appreciate who she was and what an amazing woman she was of her generation, and that she was very unusual in many ways. She was a world traveler, and she used to bring things home from her travels. And I was her executor, and I went through her things, and I kept a lot of her things, and they're around my house, and I find them very comforting. So, she taught me about creating a beautiful environment. She taught me how to entertain. She loved to entertain and have like dinner parties and, holidays. And I have really enjoyed that my whole life. Yeah. I miss her. I do miss her.
I know.
And I I think it's always the thing. I think about this with my children, like that there's always a gap. I think a lot about the generation gap. You hear about that, but what it means is that when you get to the point of understanding your mother, she may not be here anymore.
Exactly.
And that there's things I just can't understand about my children because they live in a different culture, a different time. They were raised with different influences than I was, and that there's always that gap. And it's like, how do you bridge that gap? And it's I just reflect on it a lot, as I spend time with my grandchildren, with my children, and I think about my parents. I wish I could sit down with both of them, just for one day and really have a conversation. I think that would be remarkable.
It's that's what I've experienced after my mom passed away, is how many things she talked about, the stories that I grew up with, I took for granted in a way. And only after she was gone, I'm like, oh, but I wish we had a real conversation about it. I wish I talked to her about it more, understood where it's coming from and what was happening. But it's beautiful that we can become even closer to them once they're gone.
When my mother had dementia, it was so complicated for me. I mean, it was very difficult on many levels. To watch her, lose herself, but she softened with her dementia.
Yes.
She turned sweet, and it was, she was no longer a threat to me the way she had been before. And it really freed me to love her. And I've talked to other people, who've had changes in the relationship with their parent when at the end of the parent's life. I mean, sometimes it doesn't go that way at all. Sometimes they get nasty. And up until the moment they die, they are still, nasty and harsh.
It can get
and
worse.
Abusive and it could get worse. I lucked out. It got better. And it enabled me to soften towards her. because I didn't feel I had to protect myself from her anymore, which is something I had felt for decades.
Mm. Mm. Laura, thank you so much for this beautiful conversation.
Oh, you're welcome. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I did too.
We could talk all day.
We could. And there's so many other topics, you know. There's cancer and the whole family dealing with cancer. There's dementia. There's immigrant parents. There's so many other topics that I would love to talk to you about that I read about in your book. Next time. Will you help me?
Next time, I agree.
Next time, yes. Will you help me to recap? So as you were speaking, I was writing down, and I have as the positive lessons you feel you've learned from Mama Temme is a value of good friends, a value of good women friends that she had.
Yes.
Her trust in your intelligence and creativity. I love the thing how you mentioned the cards, the playing cards, which serve as deep, immediate relaxation. Love for nature, forgiveness. What a big one! And how she forgave her husband, and how that learning about this forgiveness helped you to forgive her in a way. Supporting your children's interest, and the big one that maybe goes hand in hand with forgiveness is learning to love somebody who hurt you in the past.
Yeah.
And then something you wish she was able to teach, or something she was not able to teach you, to relax. Laura, you don't want to know how often I hear this from daughters. I don't know what it is with us moms. Let's teach our children to relax. Yes, to relax and self-care. That comes up very, very often. This is something mothers are not teaching their daughters, and they should be, obviously.
You know, it's interesting because my partner, Karen, played that role. She taught our children that. She really valued it, and she insisted on it. So I think they had an antidote from me and my activities.
The right for kids to have their psychic privacy. I love that. And I love it how you connected that with allowing them to slowly emancipate themselves from the parents. Having deep intimacy with a partner is something she was not able to model for you. And then something very fun that she did teach you was entertaining and creating beautiful environments and traveling. Can we call it joy of life? I had a feeling that was kind of just loving life. So. Yeah. Did I miss anything?
No, loving community. You know, like she always had a community of people, or many communities of people around her. When she was 80 years old, I made a tribute book for her birthday. And I interviewed or got photos from, I don't know, over 100 people. And I mean, there were so many circles of people who adored her. So that was a very satisfying, just to see how many people loved her and the people she traveled with and the people she acted with and the people she did storytelling with and her colleagues and her just on and on and on. So she had a big impact on a lot of people.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much for being my guest. Thank you for writing the beautiful book that you shared with me and so many people around the world. I'm not surprised it's touching so many hearts and changing lives.
Well, it's been such a pleasure. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. I look forward to sharing our conversation with a wider audience.
Yes.
It's been wonderful.
If you enjoy Thank You, Mama, and want to help it grow, please take the 2 seconds to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps. If you'd like to get in touch, you can send me a mail at info@thankyouMama.net. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter under Anna Teider. That's TAJDER. This was Thank You, Mama. Come back next week, subscribe, and tell your friends.